Remember back when survival sims were all the rage on Steam? Well, Stranded Deep, one of the more high-profile of those survival sims, finally released on consoles last year after having spent half a decade or so in early access on Steam. I downloaded it for my PS4 when I was offered it as the free monthly game for PlayStation Plus subscribers, and had a lot of trouble getting into it. I was very frustrated with how little the game bothers to explain itself and how much trial and error I had to put up with just to learn the basics. However, I did stick with it, and I did start to warm up to it after several restarts and some time spent on the wiki. I imagine I'm not the only one checking out this game on consoles, especially since it, like I said, was free for PlayStation Plus subscribers earlier in the summer. So I thought I would share my 7 tips that I wish I'd known when I had started out. Hopefully, I can spare other players a lot of the trial and error and frustration that I had to endure so that you can get to enjoying the game a lot quicker and more fully. I also want to point out that I'm playing this game on a PS4, and I understand that the PC version of the game might be a little bit different. The tips that I offer here should all be relevant to PC players, but they are geared towards console players. So, that being said, here are 7 tips for surviving in Stranded Deep. Aside from some load screen tips and the brief tutorial on how to craft a handful of things, there are no in-game explanations of how anything in Stranded Deep works or what anything does. The crafting menu does not explain what the item being crafted does or how it is intended to be used, nor does it give any indication as to where the requisite materials can be found or harvested from. Because of this, I recommend keeping the wiki open on a phone, tablet, or laptop next to you while you're playing. Pause the game frequently and read what things do before you try to attempt to craft them. Otherwise, you might find yourself wasting valuable materials crafting things that you don't actually need yet, and then not having those materials available for crafting things that you actually do need. For example, in my first attempt at the game, I crafted a container shelf, expecting that I could use it to store empty coconut flasks and other supplies for use later. Nope. These shelves are only used to store the wooden crates that you'll find in shipwrecks, and then you can put things into those wooden crates. But if you don't have any wooden crates, these shelves do nothing. Everything I attempted to set on the shelf would just fall or roll off. It was a complete waste of perfectly good planks, which in this game are fairly hard to come by, and even after I had tried crafting a raft, I was not able to pick up the container shelf and move it onto the raft where it might have been useful. Furthermore, attempting to break it down did not return enough of the components for me to be able to craft a replacement that would be more useful. The lack of explanations also left me wondering how to obtain some basic crafting components. I actually got stuck in the tutorial trying to figure out how to craft lashing. I thought it would come from palm tree leaves, so I tried cutting off the fronds of adult palm trees. That didn't work, so I was left wandering around the starting island for several minutes before caving and looking at a wiki. For the record, lashing is crafted from fibrous leaves, which come from yucca and the baby palms that sprout up out of the ground. I passed right by the baby palms, expecting that they would provide the same useless fronds as the adult palms. And I didn't even see the yucca at first because there were only, I think, 2 of them on the starting island, and one of them was hidden in the corner between 2 boulders. Then later in the game, I found myself wondering if there is some kind of functional difference between hunting weapons. Does an axe, spear, or bow and arrow do any more or less damage than the other? I also wondered if there is a functional difference between the components used to craft a raft. Does it matter whether I make the raft base out of buoys, tires, or wood? Will one go faster or be more stable or durable than the other? What about the floor? Does it matter if the floor is made of planks or of scrap metal? Will the scrap metal be heavier and slower? Will it turn my raft into a heat box that will cook me out in the open sun and deplete my SPF gauge faster? Or are the different components just there to add some false variety to the game, and which one you use is entirely up to what's available and the player's own personal preferences? As far as I can tell, it's just personal preference. It's also important to know that time passes while you are in the crafting menu, and also in your inventory wheel. Don't stand around staring at the crafting menu too long, because your hunger, thirst, and SPF meters will continually drain while you are doing so. If you're trying to figure out what to do next, just pause the game and start browsing the wiki. Or you could save at a shelter, then browse the crafting menu to your heart's content, and then reload the save if you ended up wasting away an entire in-game afternoon not producing anything. If you're feeling like your resources are getting a bit strained after just a few days of being stranded in the game, you may be relieved to hear that yucca and baby palms, which both provide fibrous leaves, will continually respawn every few days. Additionally, animals will also periodically respawn. This not only includes the small crabs, sardines, and seagulls, which all seem to respawn daily, but it also includes the larger predatory animals like the giant crabs, hogs, and of course the sharks, which all seem to respawn if you leave the island for several days and return. How more giant crabs and hogs are getting onto these tiny little islands, I have no clue, but somehow they are. The fact that fibrous leaves and animals do continually respawn, and the fact that these are the raw materials for water and food, means that you don't have to worry about ever running out of water and food. It also means that anything you can craft with these components are also technically unlimited. That includes lashing, leather, and cloth. Everything else, however, does appear to be limited and does not respawn. Don't bother checking back to see if that potato, aloe, or pippy plant has respawned. They don't. If you want a renewable supply of crops like potatoes, kuwawa, aloe, or pippy, you'll have to craft a farming plot, plant one copy of the respective plant in the farming plot, and then be sure to water it regularly. If you do that, you'll periodically be able to harvest the plant for an additional supply of food, sunblock, or poison antidote. And speaking of fibrous leaves, did you know that you could use these to refill campfires and water stills? I sure as heck didn't, at least not until a couple restarts in. It's a good idea to use fibrous leaves as fuel whenever possible because, as mentioned earlier, the yucca and baby palms that they are harvested from do regularly respawn. Using fibrous leaves as fuel will make your camp much more sustainable long term, at relatively little extra cost or effort from you, the player. If you're always refilling your campfire with sticks and refilling your water still with adult palm fronds, you will eventually run out of palm trees. The trees that these are harvested from do not respawn, and you'll quickly run low on your camp's island if you keep chopping them down for firewood and water, and then you won't have them available for crafting other things later, like planks and stuff like that. The wood in particular is useful for so many other crafting projects that it's a good idea to conserve it as much as possible. You can also carry a lot more fibrous leaves than sticks or palm fronds, which means you can easily harvest a bunch from other islands and bring them back to your camp. It's tempting to set up a permanent base camp on the first little island that you wind up on, the one that's used for the tutorial. While this island will typically provide all the basics that you'll need for survival, your respawning yucca and baby palms, some tide pools for catching crabs, and probably also some seagulls for you to snare. But it might not be the ideal place for you to establish a permanent base camp. You might want to explore to find a larger island that contains some giant crabs and or hogs, as these will provide better sources of food, and the hogs in particular will provide a supply of hides that can be crafted into leather. A larger island will also likely have more potential fibrous leaves, as well as more trees for collecting coconuts, sticks, palm fronds, and so forth. And when you get to the point that you're crafting rafts or beach bungalows, you'll have therefore access to more sticks and wood for planks and floors and walls and stuff. A larger island will also likely have more room for farming plots, and hopefully also some flat beach for you to put together a larger raft. If you do choose to set up your main base camp on an island with hostile wildlife, just try not to set up too close to where they spawn and live. You don't want to return to base after a long expedition of foraging and scavenging with your food, thirst, and maybe even your health levels low, only to get run down and killed by a giant crab or hog as soon as you step off the raft. Nor do you want to wake up from sleeping at your shelter to have a giant crab or hog just waiting to charge you. If you're going to use a tide pool for catching crabs and fish, or for crafting your raft, you should also look out for the poisonous, they're not anemones, sea urchins, and avoid settling near them. I've, on multiple occasions, forgotten where they were and then accidentally stepped on one while trying to pull my raft out to sea and then got poisoned. Stupid me. Lastly, you can also consider setting up a permanent base camp on an island adjacent to a frequently visited, but maybe even potentially dangerous island. This will spare you from having to make frequently lengthy trips across the ocean. This might not be practical for all map configurations, so you still might end up just settling in the most central location. The starting inflatable life raft is very useful in the first few days of the game, but you shouldn't rely on it. It's kind of a trap. It's slow, it provides no protection from the sun, it has limited storage, and it's easily tipped by sharks. Like, seriously, how the heck did these sharks learn to get so good at tipping over life rafts? I thus recommend that once you have a sustainable camp set up with a steady supply of water and food, that you start stockpiling supplies for crafting a raft. If you see buoy balls, barrels, or tires in a shipwreck, try to collect them and bring them back to camp as soon as possible so that you can turn them into a raft base. Personally, I prefer the buoys because you can actually put those into your inventory, whereas the barrels and tires have to be carried and dragged, which is a huge pain in the ass and might not even be possible if you have to move them between islands. Anyway, if you can find corrugated scrap, bring that back to camp to be crafted into a raft floor. You can combine multiple bases together to make a bigger raft, and should try to make a raft that is at least a few tiles wide and a few tiles long. This will be more stable and will be harder or impossible for sharks to flip. You can't paddle the custom rafts, so you'll also need a sail and a rudder in order for the raft to be usable. I also recommend crafting a canopy over the segment of the raft that the rudder is attached to. This will reduce your exposure to afternoon sun as you pilot the raft between islands. If you have space left on your raft, start filling it with container shelves and fill those container shelves with any wooden crates that you find in your explorations. This will allow you to haul large quantities of supplies from island to island. Once you have a sustainable camp set up, which you are happy with, I also recommend making a backup of your save game on external USB drive or on cloud storage. This way, if you screw up or get lost at sea or get crippled by a shark attack or something like that, you have the option to go back to a safe save game and try again without having to restart the entire game and go through the tutorial and basic camp setup again. Also, once you have a viable custom raft, I recommend making another backup of your save for the same reasons. This is because Stranded Deep has ways that small mistakes can compound and cascade into more severe mistakes later on, long after you've overwritten your local save game. Consuming too many resources, letting crops die, or other mistakes can be very hard or impossible to recover from. And you might not find out that you've committed those mistakes until in-game days and probably several saves after it's too late to do anything about it. There's also more than the fair share of cheap or undeserved deaths and injuries in Stranded Deep. For instance, in this occasion, I could not figure out how to get down from this crow's nest on the shipwreck because the game didn't give me a prompt to climb down the ladder. Is there supposed to be a prompt for climbing down ladders? Did it just not show up? I don't know. Anyway, I had to just let myself fall and then mash the button to hopefully grab onto the ladder before I hit the ground. But if I didn't pull it off, I'd fall and break a leg. Not really very fair. Once you do learn the game a bit better and know how everything works, then you can try to start over on a different map and try out the Iron Man mode or enable permadeath for the extra challenge if you want. But when you're learning, it's a good idea to save yourself some time and energy in case things go way south. Don't make learning the game worse for yourself than it needs to be. Well, there it is. 7 hopefully useful tips for surviving stranded deep. I haven't done much in the way of video strategy guides or tips videos, but the ones that I have done did prove pretty successful, so I thought I'd try another one for this niche indie game that recently released on consoles. Its indie nature means there's not a whole lot of tips or strategy videos about the game currently floating around, so hopefully this fills a particular niche and will be valuable to a lot of people. If you enjoyed this content and would like to see more like it, I do have a Patreon campaign, and I hope you'll consider making a contribution and becoming a supporter. All patrons will receive regular previews of upcoming projects, and patrons at higher tiers will also have early access to select content, some patron-exclusive content, and also the ability to vote in polls that may decide the priority of upcoming projects. As I hit my goal levels, I also intend to make matching contributions to a charity or nonprofit. The exact organization to receive the donation will be selected by a vote of my patrons based on a short list of causes that are meaningful to me. I very much prefer to be independently funded by viewers and readers like you, because I don't want to be beholden to the YouTube algorithm or to corporate sponsors. I want to be able to keep making the content that I want to make on the schedule that I'm able to make it, and not be stuck having to make clickbait fluff pieces to chase algorithms or shill corporate product. And I know that the pandemic has been tough on a lot of us, so if you want to support my channel but you can't make a contribution at this time, there are still other ways that you can show support. The easiest is to simply like this video, subscribe to the channel, and post a comment. You can also share this video on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, or on any social media platform of your preference. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back again for future content.